All right, looks like we're live, Jared, so you should be able to start the meeting.
Okay, welcome. Let's call to order the October 6th North Gateway Redevelopment Advisory Board meeting. Can we do a roll call, please?
Yes, Jared Martin,
Present.
Mike White,
Here.
Mike Alley,
Here.
Deacon Lucas,
Here.
Nathan Levine,
Here.
Mark Adams, Scott Cantonwine,
Here.
and Pedro is out. Pedro Mayer.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 I heard two ayes. Opposed? None. Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the June 2nd meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay. My understanding, we don't have anyone for public comment, right, Sarah?
No one signed up this week.
Okay, no action items. The first thing we're going to do today is some ethics training. Brian is here to do some ethics training with the board. Brian, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you.
All right. Well, good morning. My name is Brian Luce. I'm an assistant city attorney for the city of Salem. I'm going to spend a few minutes with you this morning talking generally about public meetings, public records, and ethical considerations for public officials. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I've got a 2930 slideshow presentation covering these topics, and I'm going to go ahead and start that off and share my screen. We're good. Everybody can see that?
Yes. Public
meetings. Well, we're currently in a public meeting, but what is it? Oregon's form of government requires an informed public who makes, with whose public officials deliberate and make decisions in meetings so that, well, decisions can be derived in an open forum. The members of the public can participate. They can view what public officials and governmental entities and bodies are doing. The other consideration is to ensure that we're not having backdoor deals. We want to make sure that the public and our actions as public officials are as open as possible. Policy and the purpose of Oregon public meetings. As I previously stated, we want to make sure the decisions about public's business, public monies, other decisions are made and discussed in a fashion that is open to the public, that the public knows when the meetings are occurring, and that they're open to the meetings and they're accessible to all, such as we're live streaming on YouTube so that the public can view what's taking place during this meeting. And then, as Sarah mentioned previously, there's an opportunity for public comment. Well, public meetings, who is subject to it? When is a public meeting and what is it? It's all meetings of a governing body, of a public body for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or deliberate towards a decision. What's a governing body? Two or more members of a public body that have the authority to make a decision or a recommendation to a public body on a policy or administration of that. Governing bodies include the city council, but also boards such as this one. What meetings are subject to a law? What is a meeting? Well, it's a convening of a governing body for which a quorum is required. The public meetings laws apply to meetings even if the sole purpose of the meeting is to gather information and not make a decision. So for example, if this body went out to look at the urban renewal area for some sort of, construction project, that could be a public meeting. You're not making any decisions, but you're gathering information. What is not a public meeting? Well, if you don't have a quorum, you don't have a public meeting. If two or more of you folks are having dinner together, as long as you're not deliberating or discussing, board business, that would not be a public meeting. Some issues and concerns that come up often with public meetings and for public bodies is email. In the case about 11 years ago, Lane County board members ended up with a public meetings violation because they were conducting public business outside of a public meeting via email. And they did it with a string email. So person one said, hey, what do you think about this action? And they would forward it to the next, member of the body. And they would add their commentary and then forward it on to the third person. That's a no-no because you're doing what's considered a serial meeting. You're dividing up the meeting rather than conducting it fully in a public forum. The public was not able to access that information and they had no opportunity to view it or comment on that. The big stick on that is the individual board members were liable for the fines that were incurred. So it's an individual issue rather than, say, the city or the board as a whole. So be wary about sending emails about public business. Ensure that you take all your actions in the public meetings open to the public. Things to consider. Well, if someone says, hey, are you available for the meeting on next Tuesday? Well, that's not discussing, contents or, information that's going to be discussed. It's more of a, administrative task. And in the same Lane County board, they had a situation where, yes, I'm available. And then they hit reply all to all the board members with information that should have been discussed at the public body. So instead of a serial violation, they had where they created a public meeting that was not accessible to the members of the public. So we have to be, careful about email. Let's see, went through that. Yeah, here. I mean, if you've got scheduling questions and things along those lines, administrative, those are not a problem because you're not conducting business. You're just setting up for a public meeting. Here's the thing that I always jump in for all public officials, and congratulations, you are all public officials by being sworn in on the board. You are now responsible for your public ethics and to ensure that your public meetings and your public records are kept appropriately. So if you're using your personal computer and private email to conduct public business, when you're texting on your phone or you're sending something from your personal email account, remember that those emails and discussions are open to the public because they are public records. Now, there are some exceptions if you're seeking legal advice or something along those lines, but generally remember, just because you're using your private computer does not mean that the business you're conducting is something that you can withhold. They will be discoverable. And, I try to tell people to try not to, or make sure you CC your, like Sarah, for example, so that the public record will be memorialized in a more appropriate place than on your personal computer. So if you're sending emails to each other, CCing Sarah to make sure that that's the discoverable public record, rather than having a situation where a court is going to want to take a look at your phone to see whether, you violated any public, meetings laws or public records laws. Try to avoid that in all possibility. What's a public record? Well, it's prepared, owned, used, or retained by a state agency or public subdivision that relates to an activity, transaction, or function of that. That's where you get in. Even those administrative emails. Are you available on October 6th for this meeting? Even though it's administrative, it's still a discoverable public record. public records very broad. Notes you write down, texts, videos, all of that are considered public record, very broad. Public official ethics. Who's a public official? Well, you all are public officials. So all of these considerations are something you have to take into account when you are engaging in your public official business. To whom do these public or these ethical considerations and laws apply to? Well, they apply to you. They're also applied to your relatives. We've got situation where you have a member of a board, their spouse receives a gift because they're on the board. That would be an issue that the public official would have to recognize, that the ethical considerations go beyond just the individual, but also includes your family members. And if you happen to own a business, that also is going to apply. Your business cannot receive a benefit as a result of your being a member of a board. Public official means elected officials, counselors, appointed officials like you all, employees, myself, and agents of, for example, the city of Salem. You don't have to be paid to be, excuse me, a public official. What's a business mean? Well, private business. Are you self-employed? An exception to the business is for 501c3s. If the public official is only a member of the board and doesn't receive any financial consideration, then that wouldn't be, quote unquote, a business for the purposes of business ethics. The state of Oregon has broad ethical laws. The city, in our Salem Revised Code section 12, ours are even more restrictive than the state. Our rules are even harder on public officials to ensure that we don't have ethical issues. We want to conduct our business in a fashion that is the most ethically responsible. Things to look out for are conflicts of interest. You've got direct conflicts of interest. You've got the appearance of a conflict of interest, special favors, and then we have non-disclosure issues because there is some information that you guys receive that may not be disclosed to the public. Well, what happens when you have an actual conflict of interest? Under state law, it would be any action or decision, recommendation by a person acting as a capacity as a public official, the effect of which would be a private pecuniary benefit or detriment. The city is even more restrictive. It's any benefit. It just doesn't have to be funds. It can be favors. So if you are receiving a benefit as a public official as a result of an action that you are taking or could take on as a board member, that would be an actual conflict of interest, and it would be something you would not want to participate in that action. You disclose that, hey, I've got an actual conflict of interest. We're voting on whether to purchase this piece of land and I own it, and I'm going to get a direct, benefit for that. Potential conflicts of interest. Well, you are a shareholder in, I don't know, Google, and Google's buying that parcel of land. Is there a potential conflict of interest? Well, that would be so far removed from any control that you would have. If it was something you would want to disclose, you'd say, hey, I'm a shareholder in a company that's purchasing that. I want the public to know that. I'm going to receive a benefit, very small one, but I would receive a benefit as a result of this action. Again, the city's more restrictive. It's not just financial, it's any benefit or detriment. Well, what happens if you have a conflict of interest? I own the land that the board's considering recommending that we purchase. Well, you disclose it. Hey, the board's voting on a piece of property. I'm going to abstain from voting it. I'm just not going to participate in this one. Let the other board members take care of this action so that there is no conflict. I'm not taking any action as a public official on this particular case. If there's that potential, you disclose it saying, hey, I'm a minor shareholder. I have no control over this particular, entity that's looking to purchase the land. So I'm just going to disclose it, but then I'm able to participate in certain circumstances. City is even, a little more restrictive because we don't want the appearance of impropriety where it looks like the board is doing something bad or a board member. So, the grayer it gets, the more likely that you would want to, refrain from participating. We define appearance of impropriety as public officials are bound to observe in their official acts the highest standards of morality and to discharge faithfully the duties of their office, regardless of personal consideration. Their conduct in both their official and private affairs should be above reproach. We don't want to have our public officials on the front page of the paper on deals that look funny. We don't want that. We want to be as clear and as clean as possible. We have an obligation to be fair and impartial when you fulfill your duties. You can't use city-owned property for private use. That's generally not a problem on advisory boards, but it's something to take into consideration. And then we don't grant special privileges based on the fact that you're a public official or a board member. Hey, I can get you into here for free or something along those lines. Please don't disclose confidential information that comes in. For example, in my land purchase deal, if, before it's made public, if the price that this, the city would be willing to pay, you disclose that information to the general public, and it actually will undermine the city's ability to negotiate a decent and fair price. So those are some things. You can't use city confidential information to advance your personal or others' financial gains. Here's the deal with being a public official. Consequences, like in the Dundee case for Lane County, the consequences are personal to the individual board member. They're not covered by city insurance. They're not covered by, board insurance or anything along those lines. There can be civil penalties under state law, which could require the forfeiture of, any benefit or financial gain that you may have received. Sanctions could include being removed from the board for cause. Chapter 62 of the Salem City Charter kind of memorializes all this. It applies to all elected and appointed officials, requires disclosure of any gifts, relationships, and campaign contributions, requires recusal if gifts, relationships, or contributions creates an appearance of impropriety in the minds of a reasonable person. Again, it's that, does it look bad? Does it, look squirrely? Then it probably is something that the public official does not want to participate in, and we want to be above reproach. There's some exemptions to that usually don't come up in an advisory capacity if all members are, conflicted out, but which would mean no one would be able to make a decision, but that is extremely rare occurrence. Compliance with ethic laws is your own personal responsibility. You have to comply both with city and state ethics laws, and the more restrictive the city's code always controls. What is the role of the city attorneys when it comes to ethics? Well, our client is the city or the urban renewal agency. When it comes to state ethics laws, we don't represent public officials in their personal or professional capacity. So the board members for Lane County had to retain at their own cost their own attorneys to deal with their serial public meeting violations. So keep that in mind when you're sending your emails, that you do it in a fashion that doesn't create a serial public meeting that excludes the members of the public. We're here to guide you through the process and get you pointed in the right direction. Hey, I know there's, I think maybe I've got an ethical consideration, or what do I do? Well, we can certainly point you to, the chapters in the Salem Revised Code, the Oregon Revised Statutes. We can point you to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, which will provide advice to public officials who think they may have a conflict of interest. You're not without help. It's just an external help at the state level. You call them up and say, hey, I think I've got, is this a conflict of interest here? I own some shares of Google and they're looking at purchasing a piece of property. They will give you likely an informal opinion, but that still doesn't get you off the hook. They'll give you an informal opinion, but you still have to make your own decision. And that's the decision that you will be stuck with. It doesn't provide you any liability protection. It's really just kind of some advice to point you in the right direction. If you push it and say, hey, I want a staff advisory opinion, it still doesn't exempt you from liability. So the Oregon Government Ethics Commission can write you a letter saying that that's not a conflict, but ultimately if it's challenged and say it went to court, that's not a get out of jail free card. You get in a commission opinion, then you're in good shape. It's a formal process. It takes months and months and months and months. So for those issues, generally they don't come up in an advisory board situation, but it is available should it ever come to, if you have a conflict of interest that, arises for you all, something to take into consideration. Well, if you need some advice that's faster than the state version, well, the city has a hearings officer who, receives and initiates ethics complaints. So if someone files a complaint that one of the board members here is engaging in a conflict of interest, well, that's going to be processed through our hearings officer, and he or she can render advisory opinions or interpretations. That can be requested through our city attorney, Dan Atchison. And we can always give you that information should those conflict of interest situations arise. So, welcome to being a public official. When you're using your personal computer or your phone to conduct business, remember that those communications are public records, and that whenever you engage in any business that involves the advisory board, remember that you have an ethical consideration to do it in a proper and appropriate fashion. Any questions or thoughts? If not, I will leave you to the rest of your meeting.
Well, thanks, Brian. Appreciate you coming by.
Have a nice day. Thank you.
Morning, Mark. You want to put it on the
Morning.
record that Mark Adams is here?
Sorry, guys, the internet was not working at home, so run to work a little late, but we're here.
All right. Okay, moving on. We have a grant programs update from Sarah.
Good morning. Yeah, good morning, everybody. We haven't had a chance, especially with the new strategic project grant, to kind of just share information. So I just wanted to take a few minutes. I know in your packets you received the updates, but I will go ahead and just share my screen, and then we can look at them. Pull them up here. All right. So one quick thing to note is I did not accidentally change the title of the capital grant, our standard revitalization grant. So what you received was the October 2020 information. It did say February. I noticed that yesterday, so my sincerest apologies on that front. But the big thing to know on this one is I know last year, especially, we started noticing a lot of the funds were really going out the door. It seemed like things were starting to pick up, and they really did. So if you see really from that 2021 kind of into this 2022, we had quite a few grants go out the door. We've gotten already a couple this year. There's a couple more in the queue, but we still have about 1.5 million. The thing to remember is, when we started last fiscal year, we had about 2.6 million because we just carried over during COVID. People weren't really doing a lot. So we've actually gone through about 2 years worth of funds in about a year, which is great. It shows things are happening. But I just kind of wanted to make sure that everybody was kind of up to date and seeing that we are seeing projects moving. And then as usual, I included down here, you know, we still have funds in our affordable housing grant program. We've got 300 left in there. Whether or not we choose to move that into another grant program, I think, you know, is part of those discussions for when we get into budget season. And then we still have about 750 sitting and available for that development infrastructure grant. You know, the positive thing is that things are busy, but they've slowed down enough that we can kind of continue to fund. If some of you recall, especially those board members that have been with us for a while, that year before COVID kind of seems like we have pre-COVID and post-COVID is terms of time frame these days. But that year before COVID, we put money into the grant program at the beginning of the fiscal year per usual, and it was gone within a week. And a few months later, we put another, you know, million in. It was gone within a couple of weeks, and we just couldn't keep up with the overall demand of the community. And so that's sort of why we have these breakouts of having some affordable housing funds and having some development infrastructure funds, so that some of those more unique projects that may not be ready to go as soon as we put money into the fund would have access to some potential funding. So at this point, it's the, you know, both the development infrastructure grant and affordable housing, those are eligible under our regular grant program. So that's why it could be one of those things down the road we end up wanting to merge them, but for the time being, it's not causing any issues to have them available separately. So that was the first one I just kind of wanted to bring to your attention. And are there any questions about that one? If not, we'll move on to the newest, latest, greatest. So that's our strategic project grant. So as you recall, this one we approved back in January. We had it launched in February. And this is one where you can basically receive up to $20,000 with no match required. And it's specifically for those exterior safety and security, with the idea that we're doing a lot for people that want to come into the area and who are doing these larger developments, but we also want to provide some assistance to our existing, you know, businesses in the community who might be dealing with safety and security issues, as we're also dealing with homeless issues and various things throughout the city. So it's been really popular. What I will say is the trending of it is very similar to what we saw in downtown. Their program's been up and going for a few years now. Initially, we had a lot of applications come in, and those kind of all got processed really through June. And kind of since then, it's quieted down, but we're still getting inquiries and requests. But the nice thing is, once again, I think the levels that we're funding it at should make it kind of a sustainable program where, you know, the goal is we don't want to run out and then not be able to help for 6 months. And so we funded it at 150 initially, and then we added another 150 in July. So as you'll see, we've almost put $139,000 out the door in security improvements for the area, but we still have 161,000 left. So we're kind of sitting, I think, at a really comfortable number. Obviously, if you look at owner business, you'll see some of the same names. We have some folks that own a lot of properties in the North Gateway area. And so this grant is not just like our other one. It's tied to the address and the property. It's not tied to the ownership. So that's part of why you'll see that. But you know, with these grants, it's a little bit different. In general, there's almost always a site visit involved, because it is kind of a trickier one in terms of qualifications. So typically, Seth, who is one of our project coordinators, has been going out and visiting with folks. And then Cherie, who was our downtown revitalization manager and who has met with the board, she is currently our assistant urban development director. She's also been going out and meeting with folks because she kind of created the program. So just as we work through kind of what is and what isn't eligible, they've been going out and meeting with folks as well. So I would say at this point, it's looking, you know, we're getting it out there. We're continuing to put it out in our business marketing materials that this program is out there. and marketing it to, other folks, other organizations, so that folks know that this is a resource. So we'll keep doing that, but I just wanted to kind of do a first check-in to show that, the money is going out the door, and it looks like, hopefully it's working. That's the goal at the end of the day. Are there any questions on this one?
So did I see it right that we've only used half of the what did you call it again? No, strategic. That's the security one, right? Correct.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we've used, and most of this, as you can see, went out the door last fiscal year. So we had 150 available last fiscal year. So we used almost all of it. We weren't sure if we were going to have to sort of tap in a little early to funds or what that was going to look like. But the way that it worked out was we used almost all of it. So, and then we replenished it in July with the 150. So that additional little bit is just kind of that extra 12,000 that didn't go out the door. What I will say is most people that apply will ask for the full $20,000. Typically, once they provide exactly what they're doing and their bids and what it is, it does tend to get whittled down a little bit. It's just one of those things of, we can only use urban renewal for certain things. And sometimes it gets a little confusing for folks. We can't pay for the software to run your security system. If you want the fanciest fencing that's out there, that's fantastic, but we're not going to pay for that. We're going to pay for sort of that, what's in the middle, what do you need? And we'll cover that. And if you want to upgrade that, that's kind of on you. If you have stuff and you just don't like what you have, that's not something that typically we're going to pay for. So it's really to help those who actually have security and safety gaps, not replacements, is really what we're looking at this point.
Sarah, I wanted to comment on the previous slide with the grants. It was really nice to see some diversity on that. It's a good mix of equipment and building. It's not all just in one area and a number of different businesses.
We've gotten some great outreach and folks that have been using it. I will say, our brokerage and our real estate community does a really great job of letting folks know of the programs, because it's hard for us to know. I mean, one of the struggles is because we don't have a business license program within the city of Salem, it's hard to know when businesses are coming in and going out unless it's a large one or somebody tells you. And so our real estate and our brokerage community is who we rely on a lot to say, listen, we have these programs. So when you have people coming in or, let them know that it's here, especially like the TIs, that's a really big one, especially in North Gateway, because there's some businesses and, they've been vacant for how long? And then a new entity wants to come in. And so, I will say that Seth on our team has been really great, especially up in the North Gateway area, of meeting with the different business associations and really making sure that those folks know what's out there, and then keeping, our chamber folks in the loop and our SEDCOR folks in the loop. And then obviously, word of mouth from people on this board makes a huge difference as well. So we want to keep that going and hopefully not always see the same types of businesses.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for Sarah on the grants? Did you have any more on grants, Sarah? Sorry.
No, I'm going to share my screen again. So I'm like, there's really no point in taking my screen down and putting it right back up again.
Okay. And then, like I said, I couldn't find my agenda. So it's the single property tax increment district?
Yeah. So this is something that does not apply within this URA, but it's a new thing that we're doing, but it's the creation of URA, and it's tied specifically to affordable housing, which obviously has been a big topic with this group. I mean, affordable housing, homelessness, employment, it all ties together. And so this is something that is the guidelines kind of for recently just got approved by the agency. And so I just thought I would share it with the board because I think it's an interesting sort of tool that we're putting in our toolbox to continue to help folks on the affordable housing front. So what we're basically calling is their single property TIF district. So it's basically a single property urban renewal area, but they're specifically tied to affordable housing only. Some of you might be aware of the Jory project that's over at the old Oregon State Hospital property. There's a lot of kind of little projects, large projects happening on that site, but one of them is an affordable housing project. They just had their ribbon cutting 2 weeks ago, I believe. And that was the first single URA we have ever done at the city. We've always had the ability to do them by state statute. But we've never sort of gone through the process of having one. And the way that it works is basically we create an urban renewal area, but instead of there being like a grant program that you apply for or something like that, it's all driven towards a development. And so when it's established, we look at what kind of tax increment that project is going to bring in. And then a development agreement is created where basically the developer would be getting a property tax rebate. So they would be paying their property taxes. The urban renewal would receive them just like we do with all of them. We would remove a certain percentage for administrative costs, and then we would basically refund the developer that certain percentage, assuming that they are following the affordable housing guidelines that we are putting into place for each one. And so it's unique in that we've been getting a lot of requests for affordable housing, and a lot of folks maybe just aren't able to use the resources. You know, Salem Housing Authority has certain incentives, but depending on the project may not be eligible. The state has certain programs, depending on the project may not be eligible. And so what this kind of is it's just another tool in the toolbox. And so, you know, we have sort of this high level criteria that folks would need to follow for us to just start looking at it. It doesn't mean that it would get approved, because just like when we went through the increasing the maximum indebtedness for North Gateway, as you all might recall, it was about a year-long process, and there was council meetings and planning commission and public hearings. These go through the exact same process. The only difference is they're just geared towards a singular project. And then if the URA is created, then what we do is we enter into a development agreement with said developer. And in there, we have all the terms of the affordable housing. So, you know, one of the things that you'll know is these don't have to be 100% affordable, but they do have to have at least 15% or 20 units, whichever is more, within the project. And that's what makes it a little bit different. A lot of the others programs that are out there are really directed at having 100% affordable. And what we're finding is a lot of developers who do more market rate housing are interested in incorporating affordable housing. And so this is a way that maybe we can try and work with them and then provide some incentive to maintain that level of affordability. And so we're going to have a website, should be going live any day now. So any developer, anyone, if they go under our financial incentives, they would see exactly what you're looking at right now. The other thing that we're putting out there, and it's a public works program, but I'm actually adding it to this website for folks who are doing affordable housing. There's also a waiver through public works for your SDCs. And it's tied specifically to the percentage of affordability and the length of affordability, but it's just another incentive that you can kind of package together with other things. So you can't do these within an existing urban renewal, so we couldn't have one, you know, within North Gateway. But once again, I know we've been having a lot more global conversations, and because this just recently got approved, and because at this point in time, I'm kind of on point for them, I just figured it was a great opportunity to sort of share the information with the board. And if you have any questions or feedback, and as you talk to other folks or you talk to developers, you know, this is just another thing to put out there that we can try and help and work with people on.
What's the length of this? Is it a 5-year program, a 10-year program, or what's the?
Yes. So, that's the kind of the interesting thing is so the way we're sort of starting these, the baseline when I do financial analysis is 15 rebate cycles. And that's sort of what we're looking at. And then as those numbers come in, once again, because we have the development agreement aspect, there could be a little, maybe it needs to be 17, maybe it needs to be, 18. But at the same time, that's also saying, hey, developer, you have to maintain all these levels of affordability. You can't just, keep it affordable for 5 years and then, decide to flip it and make it all market rate. And so, the folks that we've talked to thus far, that seems to be a very good number that works for them. But what I will say is, every year, once these get established, every year there has to be basically a certificate of compliance. And that has to be notarized. We have to have backup documentation. Every so many years, we will do monitoring of these. So, we're going to make sure that folks are taken care of. If they're going to get their money back and it's a program we're going to stand behind, we want to make sure that one, they're keeping those rent levels what they should be, and they're renting them. And then at the same time that they're keeping their projects up. We don't want apartment complexes where, oh, they look great, but the ones that are affordable are starting to fall apart or something like that. So we're putting a lot of those mechanisms in place right now, because to be honest, we've only done the one and their first payout isn't until 2023. So it's still very new. But what I will say is back in February, I had 4 different developers asking me for this kind of a program. And we really didn't have a program because we'd only done it once. And so that's sort of how this all came to fruition, which is we want to make sure we can be as transparent as possible in terms of what the expectations are. What do you need to come to us with? And then what does that process look like so that we're not wasting anyone's time? But then it's not a situation of, well, developer A knows someone who knows that the city might, we want to make sure everyone's aware that this is out there and it's something that, we would love to use. It's just the downside is obviously it's a long process. It's not quick. It's probably one of the longer ones that's out there, because even though it doesn't have all the projects and everything like what we did with North Gateway, because the process is still the same, it can easily still take 12 months, 12, 15 months, depending on, how quickly, all the documents are ready and the financial analysis. And then it's still a 3-month public process of going to planning commission and agency and council. And then we would still go back to council with the development agreement. So it's a very public process that we would be entailing. So what this outline of the program basically is, hey, if you meet these criteria, we can start talking, we can start doing analysis, we can start figuring it out, but it's no guarantee, because at the end of the day, it's up to council and the agency if they want to approve it. But the goal is, by keeping it strictly to affordable housing, which is a city top priority and a community top priority, that we would be more successful, hopefully, in helping those developers.
Any other questions? What else? You got any other updates for us?
Well, I sent an email for those of you who are available. There is a volunteer recognition event on October the 16th. I think I sent that out yesterday. So, to thank everyone for all their hard work and their efforts. So, please attend if you're interested. And then Jared and I have already talked, and per usual, we're going to really shoot to just do either a November or a December meeting. We'll know here in a couple weeks which way that's going to go, just out of respect for everybody's time. And I think those are the only updates I have, unless anyone has any questions for me.
Any questions?
No, it's all good.
All right. Well, thanks
for
for
me.
attending, everyone. And we will adjourn the meeting.
All right. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
guys.
Yeah, good seeing you
Appreciate it.
guys. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.